Yeah. Yeah.
Today's daf, Be'ezras Hashem, is Masechta Bava Metzia, daf Pei Ches. Just gonna start here. Hold on. Hi, Lewis. We just began. Okay.
Yeah.
Today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia, daf Pei Ches. So what we're discussing here in this, it's very nice, a nice sugya. The discussion here is a pasuk in the Chumash in Parshas Kiseitze, where the Torah tells us, Kisora bekerem re'echa, if you work in your friend's vineyard, then you're allowed to eat the grapes, as many grapes as you want until you are full. But you can't put it into your vessel to take it home. Okay, so hi, Steve. We just began. So we're discussing over here the idea that if you work for somebody, the Torah tells us, if you work in somebody's vineyard, you're a worker there, then you're allowed to eat on the job. You're allowed to eat on the job, but you can't take it home. And the Torah says it twice. And if you go into your friend's field and he's standing grain, you could cut off some ears of grain with your hand, but you're not allowed to put a sickle, to take a lot home. You're allowed to eat on the job, basically, if you work for somebody. And that's really the Mishnah, a very important Mishnah on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, and then we're going to go to Pei Zayin Amud Beis, just to discuss this Mishnah. Basically, the Mishnah says here, as you can see on the screen, the following workers actually eat min Torah. The Torah, by the way, I have to point this out to you, and I have it on my sheet over here. There is a Chumash says that if you have this, you're familiar with that. If an ox is doing threshing for you, the Torah tells you you're not allowed to put a muzzle on the ox when it's threshing, like a mask that it can't eat. It's allowed to eat while it's working for you. So not only an animal, but even if you have a regular human worker, you're supposed to allow them to eat when they're working for you. But not everything, not every time that you hire a worker can they eat. If you're working in a bakery, there's no din that the worker can eat from the baked foods. It's very specific. So the Mishnah explains, where do you say that? The following can eat min ha-Torah. In other words, they can eat on the job. Min ha-Torah, they're allowed to eat. If they're working on something that's connected to the ground, while it's the final thing. In other words, if you're cutting wheat, so then there the Torah allows the worker to work and to take some of the grain. However, if you're doing something before, let's say you're covering the roots of a tree, but you're not picking the fruits, then you're not allowed to, just pick a fruit and then, do something else. It has to be something that is connected to the ground, and it's the final job of this produce that you're working with. So if you're cutting wheat, the Torah gives you, or cutting grapes, your Torah allows you to take some grapes or wheat. And also, let's say you're working with apples, right? Cut apples. Or cut a grain. Let's say you're working with grain, and the Torah tells us that the Gemara, the Mishnah says that the Torah will allow a worker to take some of the grain as long as you didn't finish the job, that it would be chayiv and maisrus. In other words, there's a certain time period where once you cut grain, now it has the obligation of maisrus. Prior to that, you're allowed to benefit from the grain. And if you're baking bread, so any time prior to the obligation of challah, of the chi of challah, the worker that's working with you is allowed to taste from the produce. Uvedava shegedula min aretz, but it has to be something that grows from the ground. In other words, if you have a worker and he's helping you shear some wool off a sheep, well, that's not something that's from the ground, and therefore he can't take some wool for himself. So it's only specifically in what the Torah says. And then the Mishnah says the opposite. So I explained it that it's only a worker that's working on like the Torah tells you, he's working in his friend's field with standing grain, and he's cutting the grain. then he could pluck some of the ears of grain and keep it, but he's not allowed to put it into, he's not allowed to put a sickle to it, take it with a big knife and take a lot. And also, when he's coming to the vineyard, he may eat as many grapes as he wants until he's full, but he cannot take some home. Okay, now that you know the basics, let's go to the bottom of the page. And the Gemara says, Kiditanya, we're holding Peizayin on Beis, 4 lines where it gets wide. Kiditanya, like we learned in the Brisa. The key Savai, the Torah tells you when you come, Nemakam Bia, Benemalahan Loisove El Hashemish, Malahalam Bepoila Kosamedaba, Avkam Bepoila Kosamedaba. Because when you read the pasuk straight up, the pasuk seems to say anytime you walk into your friend's field, you can pluck some grain, and that's not true. We're dealing with a worker. The Torah doesn't say that you're dealing with a worker, but we know that the word kisavai and the word loisavai are similar, and just like loisavai refers over there by a worker, you're not allowed to keep his wages overnight. So kisavai means when a worker. So that's what the pasuk is saying. Kisavai, if you are a worker and you're coming into your friend's vineyard, you're allowed to eat the grapes as much as you want because you're working for him. Okay? Says the Gemara, says the Brisa, you can eat the grapes of your friend's grape. If you're working for another Jew, you can eat the grapes. And not if you're working for a goy, and then you have no right to eat the grapes of the goy. Says the Gemara, so the Torah is telling you that if you would eat the grapes of a goy, then you would get an avera. There's an opinion that all this would make sense. That the Torah, it prohibits you from stealing from a goy. Then the Torah will tell you that a poil, if you're a worker for a Jew, you can eat. If you're a worker for a goy, you cannot eat. And if you're going to eat, it's going to be stealing. Ella, but this is a very strange opinion, but it's not for now. There is an opinion that says Gezel goy mutter. Stealing from a goy would be permitted. So then the Torah tells you, so why would the Torah tell you that a goy, if you're working for a goy, you can't eat the grapes? You can even steal it. Well, so who cares? Hashtag Gezela mutter, stealing it would be permitted. Poyel miboya, being a worker, eating some of the grapes, that would, of course, be permitted. So what do you learn from Bekem Reyecha? What does it exclude? The Torah says, if you're working in your friend's vineyard, then you can eat the grapes. What does it exclude? So Maikim Law, Bekem Reyecha v'lo hegdish. If you're working for a vineyard that belonged to the Beis HaMikdash, then you don't have that right to eat on the job from the grapes. The Torah gives you a permission to eat it, right? You can eat the grapes, but you're not allowed to suck out the grape. You're not allowed to, squeeze and just take the juice. You have to eat it. Anovim, you're allowed to eat grapes. It has to be grapes, but you can't put like a little like spice on it or a condiment on it so that it'll bring out your appetite so you'll want more grapes. No, you can't. It has to be plain grapes, nothing else. Kinafshecha, you're allowed to eat it as much as you want. Kinefeshel bal bayis, as if you're the owner. Kach nafshe shel poyel, so the worker can eat as much as you want. And ma nafshecha oichel upater, just like when the owner of the field eats and he's exempt from trumas and maasros, af nafshe shel poyel, the worker also oichel upater can eat and is exempt from trumas and maasros, because you would think that even though you didn't finish the job, it didn't reach the obligation of trumas and maasros. But we learn later on that if you buy grapes, if you were an actual purchaser, you would actually be required to give off trumas and maasros for those grapes, even though you didn't do the final gemara malacha. But you would have to give off trumas and maasros. So I would think that the worker has the same laws as if he's purchasing those grapes from the owner. And therefore he would be chayiv in trumas and maasros. So the Mishnah says, the Brisa says, no, he can eat the grapes and don't worry about trumas and maasros. So you're allowed to eat until you're full. You can't overstuff yourself from those grapes. But don't put it into your suitcase and take it home. But we darshan when can you eat from those grapes? When you're actually taking those grapes and putting it into the vessels of the balabayas. Let's say you're picking the grapevine, so you're putting away from the balabayas. You could pop a couple of grapes into your mouth. But let's say you're not picking you're harvesting the grapes, but rather let's say you're just doing another work. Let's say you're watering the vineyard, but you're not picking the grapes. Then then you cannot eat the grapes. So the permission for a worker to eat the grapes of his boss is only when he's picking the grapes off the vineyard and putting it away in a basket for the boss, and then he could pop a grape or two in his mouth. However, if you're just watering the plant, so then you have no right to take from the grapes. Omar Rabbi Yanai said, now comes the Gemara and says, when does grapes or food, produce become chayiv and trumas amaisris? Very interesting machlokes. Rabbi Yanai said, Ein hatevel mischayiv b'masa. Produce doesn't become obligated to give off trumas and maisris, truma to the kohen, maisa to the Levi. When we go to Peiches Amar Aleph, Achir Pnei Habayis, until you bring it into your house. If you bring the produce into your house, then you have the obligation to give off trumas and maisros. Shnema, the pasuk says, Biarti Hakodesh Min Habayis. The Torah says that when you have to get rid of it, you have to give it to trumas and maisros. The Torah stresses that because you brought it into your house, that's why you're obligated to give trumas and maisros. Rabbi Yochanan says, Afilu Chotzer Kevas. Even if you didn't bring it into your house, but if you bring it into your gated front yard, then you're obligated, because b'sharecha means your yard, and that we say that the Levi can eat the maisris in your front yard and be full. So we see that once you bring it into the front yard, into your courtyard, then you're obligated in trumas maisris. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Nami. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Haksiv min abayis." It says, but doesn't the Torah say that the obligation starts when it renters into your house? What does he do with that pasuk? Amalach, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, "Chotzi min abayis." It means the front yard that is similar to the house. Ama abayis hamishtamer, av chotzi hamishtameres. The only time you become obligated in a courtyard starts the obligation of trumas and maisros if it's a type of courtyard that's gated front yard. If you have a gated front yard, so that's similar to your house, that it's watched there. However, if you have an open front yard, so then it's not similar to your house, and therefore you would not have the obligation of trumas and maisros until you actually bring it into your house. So, but Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is that once it reaches your courtyard into the front yard, you're obligated in trumas and maisros. Rabbi Yanai, who says only if it enters your house, even if it enters the courtyard, you're not obligated. But the Torah says that your obligation begins, that the Levi could eat the ma'aser rishon in your courtyard. What does he do with that? Answers the Gemara, the Torah says that when are you obligated trumas and maisros? If you took the produce, entered your front yard, and brought it into your house through the front door, then you're obligated trumas and maisros. But you can make a shtick. You can bring the trumas and maisros, you can bring the produce to your roof and drill a hole in your roof and then bring it into your house. Since it didn't come through the front door, you're not obligated trumas and maisros. In fact, there are people who just didn't want to give off trumas and maisros, so they knew this loophole. So they would come to their house and then bring the produce up onto the roof and then bring it into the house that way, and then there was no chi of trumas and maisros. That's what Rabbi Yanai learns. Says the Gemara. Maser Rav Chanina Chayzah asked the question on both opinions. Both opinions say that it has to be either in your courtyard or in your house, and then you're obligated in trumas or maisros. Wait a second. We just learned that a worker can eat as much as he wants, just like the balabas can eat, the owner can eat, so also the worker can eat. Just like when you eat, when the owner eats, he doesn't have to give off trumas or maisros. So also the worker can eat and not give off trumas or maisros. Okay, only a worker could eat and not give off trumas and maisros. But if you actually went to at that point and purchased the produce at that moment, chayev, you would be obligated to give off trumas maisros. My love, basada, that this means in the field. Now the question is, if a person purchases a produce in the field, the brisa seems to imply that you would be obligated in trumas maisros. But you just told me that the only time you chayiv in trumas maisros is only if you bring it into your house, or at the very least your courtyard. And says the Gemara, no. Right, here it was already obligated in trumas and maisros. Amar Papa Hacha, we're talking about over here, but Te'ena we're talking about a fig. Ha'oimedes be'agina v'noifa noiter l'chotzer askina. We're talking about a fig tree that's standing in the garden, and it bends over and the branches bend over into the courtyard. So it's already in the courtyard. Part of it is in the courtyard. And the purchaser's buying the fruits that were already in the courtyard. So imagine a fruit just outside your front of your house. That's the branches bend over into your courtyard. So therefore, if a purchaser would buy those fruits, he would be obligated trumas abayis. Well, the abayis, and according to the opinion, it says it has to be actually into your house in order to be you to be chayiv trumas abayis. Labayis. That means the branches reached over into your house, and therefore it was chayiv. So if a purchaser would buy those fruits, he would be obligated to give off trumas amayis. Says the Gemara, if the fruits are already in your house, ihachi. So balabayis nami lechayiv. If the balabayis, the owner, would eat those fruits, he would also be chayiv because the fruit tree is already in his house. So of course he would be chayiv to give off trumas amayis. So why would the purchaser be any different than the owner himself? And says the Gemara, balabayis eina b'tei nasei. The owner of the tree, he wants to. He's concerned about the whole tree, and therefore everything goes at the main part of the tree, which is outside the house. So until he collects everything on this tree and brings it into his house, he has not completed the final work done for this tree, and therefore he's not obligating trumas amayis. But the owner, the purchaser, his eye is on the fruits that were cut off from those branches that reached into the house. So that in that case, the purchaser would be obligated to give off trumas amayis. Says the Gemara. So, but this all presumes that if you buy something from somebody, if you buy produce and you didn't produce the produce, it didn't come from your field, you would be obligated to give off trumas amayis. Says the Gemara challenges even that. Somebody who buys fruit, not from his field, but he buys fruit from somebody else, is he chayiv to give off min Torah trumas amayis? Well, Tanya, we learned in a brayso, why did the place of Beis Hinoi, the shops of Beis Hinoi, be destroyed 3 years before Jerusalem? Something happened in Beis Hinoi before the destruction of the temple. They did something wrong. Then what did they do wrong? So it's a brayso, and they should be the divrei mal divrei Torah. They would only follow the Torah and not what the Chachamim said. So whatever the Chachamim found you shouldn't do, they found a heter that the Torah says you can do it. Because they would say, we go to Amud Beis, Ches Amud Beis, Asa to Asa v'achalta. Give off trumas amayis, and then you can eat. V'loi moicher, not the seller, not if you're selling the fruit, you don't have to give off trumas amayis before you sell it. Tvua zaracha, it's the produce of your seeds. V'loi lekech, not if you purchase it. So minat Torah, even a purchaser does not require to give off trumas amayis. So what's your basis that if you purchase something, you would have to give off trumas amayis? And says the Gemara, you're right, el midrabanan, a purchaser only is chayiv midrabanan ukras machta be'alma. And the pasuk is just just to remind you that a worker can eat without trumas amayis, but a purchaser would have to give off trumas amayis, albeit midrabanan. So there's Gemara. Then what do you do with kanavshecha? El kanavshecha l'may asa. What is nafshecha telling you? In other words, why is the Torah telling you that if you're a worker, you could eat like the owner and you don't have to give off trumas amayis? Who would have to give off trumas amayis? And what is it teaching you? Kanavshecha. You're like the owner. The worker is like the owner. What is that coming to teach you? Look at the Tanya, like we learned in the brayso. Kanavshecha, that the worker is like the owner. Ma nafshecha, just like the owner, im chesamta potter, if he would he would force the worker to wear a mask. Okay, let's say he forced the worker to wear a mask, or he gave him extra money. He tells you can't take any of the grapes for yourself. So potter, right? Just like the worker himself. If the owner himself put himself a mask, he didn't do anything wrong. It's his fruit, right? If he makes his worker put on a mask and not eat any of the fruit, he doesn't get malchus. Like I said before, the Torah tells you that if you have an animal and you force it to wear a mask while it's threshing, then you get malchus, because you over like sachsem sharbadisha. That's this pasuk over here, right? All the way down. Like sachsem, you're not allowed to muzzle an ox while it is threshing. What about if you force your worker to wear a mask and not allow him to take any of the fruit? You don't get malchus for that. And that's what's kanafshecha. Just like the owner, if he doesn't eat, he didn't do anything wrong. So if you force the worker not to eat, you don't get any punishment for that. Masiv Marzutra, so Marzutra asks, Ezehu Goyrin Lamaisris, the Brisa says, what is considered a Goyrin Lamaisris, which means what is considered a gathering for Maisris, Bekishuim Vidiluim, with gourds, right? Mishia Pasku, when the flour comes off the gourd, then you're obligated to give off Maisris. When does the flour come off? Probably in the field. When the flour comes off. Even in the field, if this flour of this gourd falls off, you're obligated to give off maisros. But you just told me, Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yochanan made a statement that it's only obligated to only if it enters the house, or only if it goes into the courtyard, Yechayiv maisros. And here we see even in the field already Yechayiv and Trumas and maisros. And says Gemara, loy, mishi pasku babayis. It means that the flour fell off while it was in the house. It means you brought it into the house. Still, it's not obligated in Trumas Maisus unless this flour part of this gourd falls off. Ihachi mishi pasku achi pasku mibayale. It should say until it gets the flour falls off, not mishi pasku when it falls off. It means we're trying to say that when you enter the house, the gourds enter the house, it's not obligated to Trumas until it falls off, not from when it falls off. That's not the right language to use. So the Gemara says, "Itano achi pasku." If it would say until it falls off, havamina adagmala pikusayu, until all of the flowers fall off on all the gourds that you brought into the house. Kamash Milan. That's what Mishia Pasku, when it falls off, when it starts to fall off, then the obligation of Trumas and Maisris start. So basically, what we just said is that the Trumas and Maisris obligation happens when you bring it into the house, not in the field. In fact, when it's in the field, as long as you can still eat from it. When you bring it into the house, so most foods, Trumas and Maisris obligation begins when you bring it into the house. But for gourds, you have one step further when the start of the flour part starts falling off from some of the gourds, then the obligation of Trumas and Maisros begin. Another question. Masu Mazrush, final question. Masu Mazrush Bered Rav Nachman. Goyrana lemaisros l'chayiv of mola mishum tevel mishum degam lachta. When you put maisros in storage, that's when you're obligated tevel, you have to give off trumas or maisris, and that's the final malacha. The ezu gumam malacha, what is called finishing the job, meleches hachnasosan. When you gather it, what does it mean? You put it in one place. My love doesn't mean hachnasosan afilu basada. When you gather it in one place, even in the field. So even in the field, if I take all the wheat and put it in one storage house, I'm chayiv Mr. Maisris. So we see, not like Rabbi Yanai, not like Rabbi Yochanan. We see that even in the field, the obligation of Trumas and Maisris begins. Answers the Gemara, loy hachnosus labaya zehu gemam lochdem. The Torah, the Brisa didn't say field. We're just saying, assuming it in the field. Hachnososa means you bring it together into your house. That is the final job. The same, if you want, I can tell you that Rabbi Yanai, who said that you have to bring the produce into your house, was not talking about wheat. Wheat in the field already, Yechayiv and Trumas and Maisros. Ki kama Rabbi Yanai bezeisim va'anavim, by olives and grapes, where you don't store it in a storage granary in the field, you actually bring it home. The lav b'nei gerin, those are not storage in a granary. You actually collect the olives and bring it to your house. So there, then when does the obligation of Trumas Maisros begin? Only after you cross the threshold, bring it into your house. But wheat and barley, there the Torah says when you store it. Well, wheat and barley you can store in the field, and therefore the obligation of Trumas Maisros begins over there. One more piece of Gemara, then we'll stop. 2 more minutes. Say that a person who works in the field is allowed to eat the grapes, right? He's allowed to pick a grape off the vineyard and eat it. A human can eat the grapes and pick it off the tree. Vishar, and the ox, betolish, can eat the grains that he's threshing when it's not connected to the ground. Adam betolish minolan. How do I know a worker that's working in uncut fruits and uncut he could eat? In other words, let's say you're working with apples that were already picked. How do we know that a worker is allowed to eat those fruits? Torah only says when you're cutting grapes, then you could take a grape off the tree. How do I know if you're dealing with apples and the apples are already picked and you're just working and cleaning them, let's say, you're allowed to eat some of those apples? So the Gemara says, Kal v'chayim b'shar, we make a kal v'chayim from shar. Ma shar she'eino oichel b'mechuba oichel b'talish, adam she'oichel b'mechuba ein adin she'oichel b'talish. Just like an ox, it cannot eat something that's connected from the ground. It could only be eating something that it's threshing. It's disconnected. So, but an Adam could eat b'mechubar. We already established when it's connected to the tree, the human has a right to eat. Certainly, it has a right when it's disconnected from the tree. So the Gemara says, wait a second. An ox is more stricter. An ox, you have an obligation that you're not allowed to force it to wear a mask. And if you do, you get malchus. But a human, there's no command that the owner cannot force it to wear a mask. And if he does, he doesn't get punished for that. So how do you know? So an ox may be more stricter than a human being. And therefore, an ox has the only isser is when it's disconnected. So the Gemara says like this, then the Gemara says, wait a second, let's make an isser that you're not allowed to muzzle a human being. Mishar. Just like you're not allowed to muzzle an ox, you can't muzzle a human being. Why? Ashar, you're not commanded to make it live. You don't have to give tzedakah to an ox, but you are commanded not to muzzle an ox. A human being, you are commanded to give tzedakah to. Certainly, you'll be obligated not to muzzle a human being. Certainly, you shouldn't muzzle a human being. The Torah gives a separate halacha, says that the worker is like the owner. Just like the owner there's no isser if the owner muzzles himself, there will be no isser if the owner muzzles his worker. So we're going to stop over here, right over here. But still, we're trying to find out, and we're going to leave this question for tomorrow. There is a permissive, a worker is allowed to eat grapes when he's picking the grapes and off the tree. For the owner, he's allowed to take some of the grapes and pop it in his mouth. The question is, if he's working with apples that were already picked and he's just, let's say, washing the apples, how do we know that the worker is allowed to eat those apples? The Torah doesn't say it's permitted. So that's the Gemara's question. So we'll stop over here. Okay.
Thank you.